I can completely see where the Trump administration is viewing the importance of Pakistan from that frame. They are an ally who gives us, if you want to use the word that we use, access. If we have a presence there, it puts us that much closer to China, puts our assets closer to China and Iran. There's a lot of ways to read into it. Obviously, if I had inside knowledge to do exactly what the Trump administration is doing or Pakistan's government was doing, then I could, precisely answer this. However, I think what I could infer from it is the Trump administration has made very clear, even to the extent of renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War. They have made very clear the idea that they're very comfortable with the fact that military affairs is central part of what governments do. And so I can completely see where, especially if you start looking at other things, if you start looking at like Bagram, the fact that the Trump administration is making these demands to regain the air base in Afghanistan. And the reason why is because they're like, we want to be able to have military presence towards China. I can completely see where the Trump administration is viewing the importance of Pakistan from that frame. They are an ally who gives us, if you want to use the word that we use, access. If we have a presence there, it puts us that much closer to China, puts our assets closer to China and Iran. And indeed, recently with the attack, the Midnight Hammer that happened a few months ago, that was enabled by having this type of access, by having U.S. bases, U.S. personnel in other countries, so forth. So I think when viewed from that framework, that the Trump administration absolutely has military policy as like the forefront of foreign policy, then it makes sense that it's like, well, why would we not have Pakistan's military officials be part of this conversation? Because that's like a central part of why we're going to be talking with them. What's interesting is that's not really a departure for the United States. Pakistan's always been critical from a security standpoint. It's just that the Trump administration is much more, hence renaming Department of Defense, Department of War. They're just much more willing to be open about it and be like, look, yeah, we want military officials here because we want them to talk to our military officials, or Trump wants to talk to them directly. So I think that, for me, would be what this points to.
Now, 4 years ago, or the Biden administration, to be precise, was okay with India buying crude or energy from Russia. And now here you are, this administration wants to end that. So there are these confusing signals or, this conflicting policies. Do you think that America is a reliable partner for India?
This is the conflicting signals is absolutely something that one should be asking about, especially when you go from Biden administration to Trump administration and you're like, what can we trust? Who can we rely on? And that's actually like a more fundamental question about just democracies in general. And it's not specific to the U.S., but that if you have a new leader, does that lead to such a big change in foreign policy that you can't really, they're not predictable. So I think that's a general critique. But in the case of going from Biden to Trump, yes, I think that this is a point of concern, because what's interesting is, the Biden was in many ways, I labeled Biden, and this is probably, now that I think about it, I think this goes a long way towards why he's like, well, you know what, India's going to do this, but we're not going to worry too much about it. Is because I think Biden also, much more so than Trump, had kind of this realpolitik view of foreign policy. I often refer to Biden as his foreign policy view being realpolitik with a liberal internationalist flair. That he would talk a lot about liberal internationalism and the need for cooperation in institutions and so forth. But if you actually looked at what he would do and even things he would say at times, it was much more like, is this in the nation's interest? No, not really. Okay, we're going to move on. And also understanding that other countries are going to behave that way as well. Case in point that I think many would highlight would be the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. He's like, nope, this is not what we're going to do anymore. He had long wanted the U.S. to pull out of Afghanistan. Even when he was vice president, he wanted the U.S. to pull out. and of course, as vice president, he can't make that call. My understanding is that was something he was very frustrated with Obama. But once he was president, that was one of the first things he did is we're going to follow through with this. We're not going to back out, even though it was Trump who signed the actual agreement to withdraw. He's going to do that. I bring that up to say that that is an example that people have pointed to of where Biden very much had this realpolitik view that like international politics is not about necessarily friends and foes per se. It is about nations following their interests and kind of having a tolerance for that. So I think that goes a part of the way towards why with India, he was like, look, India is doing what they think is in their best interest. And moreover, because Biden kind of had that like, I mean, it was very well known that Biden had a lot of knowledge and a lot of expertise for foreign policy. That's why he was Obama's vice president. I think he could also see the bigger field, if you will. He could say, we're going to tolerate India buying this energy from Russia because we need India in the Quad, for example, to be able to balance against China. And that is one thing that I think was very much a common thread through Biden's administration was everything was about balancing China. His summit of democracies that he brought together. Yeah. That was, I mean, even some of the countries that were part of that, it was questionable about how democratic they were. But I remember at the time of those summits, I was doing some interviews where I said, the best way to understand who's been invited to that is it's who's not been invited. And it's China that hasn't been invited. It's really about balancing China. It's about creating this coalition to balance China. So that was kind of Biden's view of things. Trump has a bit of a different view. Trump, if you even go back to when he was president the first time, one of his biggest criticisms of NATO allies wasn't just that they weren't spending enough on defense. That was something, he had long done, and he wasn't an outlier for that. It was European allies buying Russian energy. That was actually the big breakdown. I think it was the 2017 NATO summit where he basically yelled at, I think, if I remember correctly, I think he yelled at Merkel for the fact that Germany was still buying because of Nord Stream and energy coming in. And it's like, why are you making yourself economically dependent on the very country that you're trying to counter against? So Trump has long made that like a focal point that like, if Russia is this threat, you don't buy energy from them. And I think much more so than whereas Biden had more of a tolerance for that. So it's not surprising. And again, this is something that since the beginning of the war, India has played this key role of being willing to buy the energy from Russia, largely out of their own interests, largely because it's like, well, we can buy it at a 30% discount. Why would we not do that? But I think Trump, again, has more of this view that, no, that is like the best. That is how Russia's thriving. And I don't care if you're India. I don't care if you're the European countries. I don't care who you are. If you're buying that, that's not an acceptable policy. And so that's where I think if you will, kind of the whiplash comes in, that it's like Biden was much more tolerant because of his realpolitik view. Trump is much more like energy is the key way that Russia thrives. Anybody who's buying it, I don't care who it is going to be liable to this criticism.